Today we're going to be looking at a GCSE exam question, and you will learn about assessment objectives, how to break the question down, identify the key elements, understand how to structure your answer, receive some guidance with some example answers, and try to understand what to do and what not to do when you're writing your answers. Remember that GCSE assessment objectives are set by Ofqual and all are the same across all GCSE Geography specification and exam boards. These are measured in 4 ways. Here's a table outlining them all. Assessment Objective 1 essentially requires you to remember material. This is easy 1-mark questions, 2-mark questions in the exam. Assessment Objective 2 is all about understanding, so it's easy to moderate. Assessment Objective 3 is applying, analysing, evaluating, and the level of difficulty increases. And Assessment Objective 4 is all about creating, which will be a lot more challenging. So that will take into account a variety of different skills, techniques to demonstrate your understanding of geographical skills. Breaking down the assessment objectives, command words such as state and describe will be typically 1 or 2-mark questions and will come under Assessment Objective 1. Assessment Objective 2 questions tend to have explain, suggest, discuss, or to what extent in the question itself. Assessment Objective 3, your 9-mark questions for example, will typically start with to what extent or assess the importance of X or Y in the exam itself. This is a 9-mark question that will come up in the cold environments topic. Let's break this down and find out what we need to do to answer this question well. So these are the key components of the question. You need to assess, so that's the trigger word that you need to focus on. For an assess question, you're going to have to list different examples of something and talk about whether they are having an impact or not having an impact. So we'll talk about this in context of this question in a minute. So we're going to assess the importance of management strategies. So we're going to think of some management strategies that help to reduce the risk of environmental damage in cold environments. So let's break this down even more. If we look at the assessment objectives and what the mark scheme is looking for here, you've got 2 different brackets and different things being requested for middle order marks and high order marks. So for 4 to 6 marks, you're going to demonstrate clear knowledge about something and also have some geographical understanding of how management strategies can reduce the risk with some application. So you're probably not going to have a detailed knowledge about something. You're going to have some elements that you can demonstrate well, but it may be missing some parts within your answer essentially. For the 7 to 9 marks, you're going to have detailed knowledge, so that will be specific names, facts and figures, but also showing your thorough understanding of how management strategies reduce risk, and also a clear and well written answer throughout, which demonstrates your authority over the question that's being asked. Now, if you're at home and you're revising for an end of unit assessment, or you're revising for a mock exam, or you're revising for your actual exam coming up, take the time to break the question down, take out your notes, take out your textbook, and engage with the question instead of trying to write the answer from the top of your head. This way you're going to learn a lot more, you're going to embed that information into your mind as you're writing, engaging with the material, rather than you sitting at home reading from a textbook or reading your notes from your exercise book. So here's a good way to break it down. In this question, you can write down in the far left hand column your chosen environment. That could be Alaska, it could be Antarctica, it could be Svalbard, wherever your chosen place is. Then identify some strategies that have been used to reduce the risk from environmental damage into this little table. You might want to pick out 2 or 3. You won't need many more than that. And then very briefly describe how this strategy reduces risk from the environment getting damaged. So carefully do that, spend a few minutes doing that, write the table out. This way you're not only going to revise well, you're going to embed that material and reflect and write a much better answer when it comes to it. So I would suggest pausing here, coming back to this, and then carrying on. So here's some sample answers for this question. Let's have a look at this one here. There are a few management strategies to reduce the risk of damage to cold environments. So this is an introduction to this question and answer. Most students are going to end up writing something similar to this, but actually it doesn't really do much for your answer, because here the candidate's just written there are a few management strategies to reduce risk of damage to cold environments, but doesn't actually mention any at all. So for a level 3 answer, remember that you've got to demonstrate detailed knowledge. If you're going to write an introduction, make sure you mention some in your first few lines. Here's another answer or introduction. Management strategies are very important in reducing environmental damage because damage may take years to recover. Again, doesn't mention any management strategies and gives some idea about temporal time period, how things may change over a long period of time, but it doesn't actually talk about what kind of damage that may happen in an environment. So again, this would be classified as a level 1 sort of answer, or a level 1 introduction even for this question. So bear in mind that if you're going to write introduction to an assessed question, you must put in the management strategies that you're going to talk about right at the top in the first line of your answer. Here's a paragraph from a answer itself. So we moved on from the introduction now. In cold environments, it is extremely important that management strategies are in place as they allow economic development whilst caring for the environment and stopping long-term damage. These management strategies help this happen. Okay, it seems like this is a well-written answer. You've got the mention of cold environments, although the candidate doesn't actually mention a specific place. Then it goes on to say it is extremely important that management strategies are in place as they allow economic development, but it doesn't actually talk about a specific management strategy, and it doesn't talk about how or why that management strategy helps to stop long-term damage. And then the paragraph ends with these management strategies help this happen. So really this candidate hasn't said anything at all in this paragraph which helps to demonstrate their understanding or demonstrate their authority of knowledge on this particular topic. They've written a well-written generic comment, but this is not enough to get you marks on the exam. So be careful when you're writing out your answer. Make sure that you plan out your answer before you start writing it. My suggestion would be, in the exam, if you saw a question like this, you underline management strategies and you write down 2 or 3 examples, particularly if it's a 9-mark question. That way, you've then got the structure for the paragraphs that you're going to be writing in the exam, and you can make sure you can tick them off as you go along, rather than saying generic things which won't get you many marks at all. Here's another example. Technology has had the largest impact in management of cold environments. One example of this would be the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline. Without technology, it would have damaged the environment greatly, blocking migratory routes, melting the permafrost, and causing massive oil leaks. Thanks to technology, the pipeline has been raised to allow animals to pass underneath. The pipe has been insulated to prevent the heat from melting the permafrost, and the flow stops automatically if the smallest of leaks are detected. Let's start with the first line. technology has had largest impact on the management of coal environments. So it establishes that in this paragraph, this is what the student is going to talk about, which is a good way to start a paragraph. Is it necessary? Not completely. This candidate could have just started from the second line, but it contextualizes it well. The second line is well written and it ties in with the first line very well. So one example of this would be transatlantic pipeline. So it's given an example of a strategies that have been used to move oil in Alaska itself. Then it goes on to talking about how it has reduced the risk to damage to the environment by talking about migratory routes and melting the permafrost and causing oil leaks. Even better would have been to maybe mention the animals that would be using the migratory routes. So for example, the caribou. Maybe talk about the fact that the temperature of the pipeline is about 45 degrees Celsius. So therefore that would encourage melting of the surrounding environment, hence why that's a problem. At GCSE, that would help you even more towards the 7 to 9 mark question. But here the candidate has written this well enough, and that should be sufficient to get into a level 3 answer. Then it goes on to say, thanks to technology, the pipeline has been raised. So it shows now how this strategy is now reducing environmental damage. And it talks about the fact that animals are allowed to pass underneath. It also talks about insulation, which from the heat to stop the permafrost from melting. And it also talks about technology that's been put in place to figure out if there's a leak in the oil. Now, this candidate could have talked about how that would reduce environmental damage further by stopping the oil leaks, but actually he or she has done very well as they've gone through this paragraph detailing the importance of this particular management strategy. So think about this carefully. Remember that when you're structuring your answer, your paragraph, make sure that your first line refers to a specific point that you're going to be referring to. The next few lines will give some examples of how it reduces the risk to damage to that environment, and your final line should be probably a judgment about the importance of this management strategy. Now in this particular paragraph that's not been done, so make sure that you get the full marks, that you go back to the original question, say to a large extent or to a small extent this strategy has been very successful or it has not been successful. Here's another paragraph. The Antarctic Treaty is a very important management strategy. So good start to the paragraph. So it establishes a specific example and it contextualizes it. It sets out the rules regarding mining and tourism in the Arctic. So now this candidate has developed the point further by establishing why it is a good strategy. Then it goes on to say, without this, because the Antarctic has lost minerals, it would be heavily mined and environmental damage would occur. This is establishing the issue if the treaty did not exist today, which is a very valid point to make. The Antarctic Treaty controls tourism to protect the natural environment, as well as limits to mining and fishing in the area to keep one of the world's last great wildernesses intact and healthy. Again, a totally valid point that's in context of the Antarctic Treaty, and it goes back to the original question. So again, a very well developed paragraph here talking about a specific management strategy, talks about why or how it's reducing risk, and even better would have been if this candidate had just in the final line of the paragraph talked about to what extent this was an important strategy to use. So going back to the assessment objectives for level 1, 2 and 3, if you're going for a level 1 answer, 1 to 3 marks, your ideas are going to be largely generic ideas. So for example, you may say something along the lines of, government action is important because they can ban things that will harm the coal environment. So no examples given, just a general vague idea of government intervention. Or technology can be used to reduce the impacts of cold environments by reducing oil leaks because oil is very dangerous. Again, nothing has actually been said here, no example has been given, no management strategy has been given. Again, this would qualify for a level 1 answer. For 4 to 6 mark answers, it's going to be a clearer understanding of how management strategies have reduced the risk to the environmental damage. So for example, the candidate might say something like, the Natural Environmental Policy Act ensures that companies involved with extracting and transporting oil protect the natural environment, but doesn't actually say how it protects the natural environment. It just talks about a specific example, so it demonstrates understanding of a particular strategy, but doesn't actually explain how it reduces the damage to the environment. And level 3 to 7 to 9 marks, a detailed explanation of how management strategies have reduced the risk to environmental damage. So for example, the candidate may write, the Antarctic Treaty was created in 1959, which prevents economic activity as well as ensuring tourism has a minimal impact. By only allowing scientific research, this has allowed the environment to be largely kept away from human development, thereby reducing or mitigating any environmental damage to local flora or fauna. Specific examples given throughout, talks about specific management strategy, elaborates what it actually does, talks about how it reduces the risk to the environment, and talks about how it protects the local habitats as well. So remember, for level 3 responses, you've got to give some detailed examples, but also come to a judgment at the end of how useful this would be to reduce the risk to the cold environment. There are some more examples as mentioned before. So level 1 answer, candidate might say government has taken action, or countries work together to reduce damage, but doesn't actually talk about which countries, and it doesn't talk about how they are doing it. A level 3 answer might say something like the World Wildlife Fund works with local communities to manage critical ecosystems such as the Beaufort Sea. Furthermore, they support scientific research to help protect important species such as polar bears, and then the answer would continue along those lines. Remember, for 9 mark questions, do start your final paragraph with overall, or to a large extent, or to a small extent, and then talk about the strategy that you want to talk about. Don't just completely agree or disagree with the statement, and don't start a sentence with there are no management strategies which are effective. You've got to keep it balanced in your answer throughout. A good way to start your conclusion may be, overall, I think that X strategy has or have had the greatest impact on reducing damage to whatever place that you were talking about by doing X, and therefore this has resulted in Y. So, assess the importance of management strategies used to reduce the risk of environmental damage in cold environments. 9 mark question. It's now time for you to go away. You've got plenty of examples of how to write this answer. Take out your textbook, take out your notes, write your answer. You can go back in this video, rewatch some elements of this so that you can structure your paragraphs well. And you're looking to write about a page on lined paper A4, which should take you about 10 to 15 minutes if you've got a textbook open in front of you. Shouldn't take you longer than that. So remember to have 3 or 4 well-structured paragraphs, and if you follow the guidelines that I've given you here, then you should be able to write a perfect answer. Remember, you've got to practice writing. Just watching this video is not going to be enough to be able to demonstrate that you've understood what you've learnt from this video itself. Make sure that you annotate the question before writing your answer. Make sure that you're reading newspaper articles, or you're reading in general often as possible, so you get an idea of how other people write. Write in the third person. For example, the most critical factor appears to be. Write as if the person reading your answer gets the sense you're speaking with authority. You can't speak with authority if you're just saying generic things like the government did this or countries did this. You've got to be specific, you've got to give examples, and remember to write clearly and neatly. If you're writing a 9 mark question, you're probably going to be writing 3 or 4 clearly defined paragraphs. It shouldn't just be one giant lump of text that you've written onto the piece of paper. Remember, you can communicate your understanding and authority by demonstrating writing clearly and neatly in the exam. So next week we'll be going over some more exam questions. In the meantime, make sure that you've done this exam question carefully and you prepare, and the more often that you do this, the better you'll get, and by the end of you doing lots of these over a long period of time, you will be in a very strong position to do very well in the exam. So I'll see you guys next week.